The eviction notice trembled in Marcus Rivera's calloused hands as he stood in the doorway of his cramped Phoenix apartment, watching his 8-year-old daughter Sofia practice her spelling words at their secondhand kitchen table. The paper might as well have been a death sentence. 30 days to come up with 3 months. Back rent, or they'd be living in his rusted Toyota Corolla. Again. The morning sun blazed through their thin curtains, highlighting the water stains on the ceiling that had been growing since the monsoon season, much like the pile of unpaid bills on his counter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had never imagined his life would spiral this far down. 3 years ago, he'd been Detective Marcus Rivera of the Phoenix Police Department. 15 years on the force, decorated for his work with the gang unit, respected by his colleagues and feared by the criminals who knew his name. His corner desk at the precinct had been cluttered with commendations and photos of Sofia, taken back when her smile wasn't tinged with the worry that came from watching her father count coins to buy groceries. Those were the days when he could afford to take her to Castle's Inn coasters on weekends, when her biggest concern was whether to get chocolate or vanilla ice cream after riding the Desert Storm roller coaster. Everything changed the night he witnessed Sergeant Tom Bradley, his partner of 7 years, taking an envelope thick with cash from Hector Morales, one of the most dangerous drug dealers in South Phoenix. Marcus had been returning to the station late, having forgotten his daughter's school permission slip in his desk drawer, when he saw the exchange in the parking garage. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Bradley wasn't just his partner. He was Sofia's godfather, the man who taught her to ride a bike when Marcus was working double shifts, the one who showed up to every school play with flowers and terrible dad jokes. The internal affairs investigation that followed destroyed everything Marcus held dear. Bradley had been feeding information to the Morales cartel for over 2 years, tipping them off about raids, witness locations, and evidence collection. When Marcus reported what he'd seen, Bradley spun a web of lies so convincing that it nearly destroyed Marcus's career before it ended it. False evidence planted in Marcus's locker, fabricated witness statements claiming he was the corrupt one, and a smear campaign that painted him as an unstable cop struggling with his wife's death from cancer 2 years earlier. Elena had been gone for 2 years when the corruption scandal broke, but her absence still echoed through every corner of their lives. She'd been a nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital, working the night shift so she could be home when Sofia got back from school. Their small house in Ahwatukee had been filled with her laughter, her terrible attempts at singing along the Spanish radio while cooking, and her fierce protectiveness over their family. The cancer took her in 6 months, aggressive and merciless, leaving Marcus to figure out how to be both mother and father to a little girl who asked every night when mommy was coming home. The corruption charges against Marcus were eventually dropped when Bradley's scheme unraveled, but the damage was done. No police department would touch him. The scandal had made front-page news, and even though he was cleared, the stain remained. Who wanted to hire a cop whose own partner had tried to frame him? The story had been twisted so many times in the media that truth and fiction blurred together, leaving Marcus unemployed and unemployable in the only profession he'd ever known. He'd sold their house in Ahwatukee, the one Elena had painted room by room in colors she said would make Sofia feel safe and loved. The proceeds had lasted 8 months before they were forced into the apartment complex where the air conditioning worked sporadically, and the neighbors played music until 3 in the morning. Marcus took whatever work he could find. Security guard at a downtown office building, overnight shifts at a warehouse in Tempe, brief stints driving for delivery apps until his car started showing signs of giving up entirely. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while Marcus was filling out yet another job application, this one for a janitor position at a shopping mall that paid barely above minimum wage. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, belonging to someone named Patricia Henley from the law firm of Henley, Morrison & Associates in Tucson. Mr. Rivera, I'm calling regarding the estate of your great-uncle Aurelio Rivera. I'm sorry for your loss, though I understand you may not have known him well. Marcus had to think for a moment. Aurelio Rivera. The name triggered a vague memory from childhood. Family gatherings where the adults would speak in hushed tones about Uncle Aurelio, the one who'd gone off to work for the government and never came back to visit. His mother had mentioned him maybe 3 times in Marcus's entire life, always with a mixture of pride and bewilderment, as if she couldn't quite believe her brother had ended up working in what she called important places. He's left you his property in Yuma County, Patricia continued, her tone suggesting this was more obligation than opportunity. I have to be honest with you, Mr. Rivera. It's not what most people would consider valuable real estate. The property is a decommissioned correctional facility. It's been abandoned for over a decade. Marcus almost laughed. A prison. His great-uncle had left him a prison. It seemed fitting, considering how trapped he felt in his current life. Still, property was property, and maybe he could sell it for enough to keep them housed for another few months. What kind of condition is it in? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Honestly, it's in rough shape. The state stopped maintaining it years ago when they moved the inmates to newer facilities. But it is yours, free and clear. No liens, no back taxes. Your uncle paid everything up front when he purchased it from the state. We just need you to come in and sign the transfer papers. The drive to Tucson took 2 hours in Marcus's failing car. Sofia buckled into the passenger seat with a coloring book and a juice box, chattering about whether they might find hidden treasure in an old prison. Her optimism was infectious, even when Marcus felt like he was drowning. The law office was in one of those professional buildings that tried too hard to look important. All glass and steel, and very expensive-looking art that probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months. Patricia Henley was exactly what Marcus had expected. 50s, sharp suit, the kind of handshake that meant business. She spread the documents across a conference table that could have seated 12 people, though Marcus suspected most of their meetings involved inheritances significantly more valuable than abandoned correctional facilities. Your uncle was an interesting man, she said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Worked for the Bureau of Prisons for 37 years, most of it in administrative roles. He purchased the Copper Ridge Correctional Facility when the state decommissioned it in 2011. Paid cash. Marcus flipped through the documents, seeing numbers that didn't make sense. The purchase price was listed at $2. $3 million. Cash. What kind of government administrator had that kind of money lying around? Did he say why he wanted to buy a prison? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect this inheritance was more complicated than a simple real estate transfer. Patricia's expression grew thoughtful. He said he had plans for it. Something about preserving history, though he was never specific. He visited the property every few months until his health declined. Very private man. Kept to himself. The drive to Copper Ridge took another hour through desert landscape that seemed designed to discourage human habitation. The prison sat on. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. 47 acres of nothing, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with rusted razor wire that had seen better decades. The main building was a sprawling concrete structure that looked like it had been designed by someone who believed rehabilitation came through architectural intimidation. Sofia pressed her face against the car window as they approached the main gate. It looks like a castle, she said, which Marcus supposed was one way to look at it, if you imagined castles built by people who'd never heard of beauty or hope. The key Patricia had given him worked on the third try, the lock protesting after years of disuse. The gate swung open with a shriek of metal that echoed across the empty desert, announcing their arrival to an audience of absolutely no one. Marcus drove slowly up the cracked asphalt road, past guard towers that stood empty and ominous against the afternoon sky. The main building's entrance was secured with a newer lock, also included in Patricia's key collection. Inside, the prison looked exactly like what Marcus had expected. Long corridors lined with empty cells, common areas where hundreds of inmates had once served their time, administrative offices that still held the ghosts of bureaucratic routine. The air smelled of disuse and industrial cleaning products, though it had been years since anyone had cleaned anything. Sofia stayed close to Marcus as they explored, her earlier excitement tempered by the reality of being inside a place designed to hold people against their will. The cells were small and depressing, each one a concrete box with a narrow window that offered a view of nothing but more concrete and desert. The common areas were larger but somehow more depressing, spaces where human beings had been warehoused rather than helped. It was in the administrative wing that Marcus found the first sign that his great-uncle's purchase had been about more than real estate investment. Aurelio's office, marked with a nameplate that read A. Rivera, Facility Administrator, was different from the others. While most of the building had been stripped of anything valuable when the prison closed, this office remained fully furnished, The desk was solid oak, not the metal institutional furniture found elsewhere in the building. The filing cabinets were high-end models with locks that suggested important documents had once been stored there. Most interesting was the bookshelf, lined with volumes on everything from correctional administration to federal banking regulations to something called underground construction and security protocols. Marcus was examining the books when Sofia called out from across the office. "Daddy, this wall sounds different." She was standing near what appeared to be a solid concrete wall, tapping it with her small fist. Marcus joined her and knocked on the wall himself. Instead of the solid thunk he expected, the sound was hollow, echoing as if there was empty space behind it. Running his hands along the wall's surface, Marcus found what felt like a seam, barely visible but definitely present. It took 20 minutes of searching before he discovered the hidden mechanism, a section of bookshelf that, when pulled, revealed itself to be a door. Behind it was a staircase leading down into darkness, lit by emergency lighting that apparently still functioned after all these years. "Should we go down?" Sofia asked, her voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to be careful, to think before acting, to consider the potential dangers. But curiosity won out, and they descended the stairs together, their footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. The basement level was unlike anything Marcus had expected. Instead of the utilitarian concrete and steel of the prison above, this space was finished with high-end materials, polished floors, painted walls, professional lighting. It looked less like a prison basement and more like a high-security office complex. The corridor led to a series of rooms, each more surprising than the last. There was what appeared to be a command center, with banks of monitors and communication equipment that looked 47 acres of nothing, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with rusted razor wire that had seen better decades. The main building was a sprawling concrete structure that looked like it had been designed by someone who believed rehabilitation came through architectural intimidation. Sofia pressed her face against the car window as they approached the main gate. "It looks like a castle," she said, which Marcus supposed was one way to look at it, if you imagined castles built by people who'd never heard of beauty or hope. The key Patricia had given him worked on the third try, the lock protesting after years of disuse. The gates swung open with a shriek of metal that echoed across the empty desert, announcing their arrival to an audience of absolutely no one. Marcus drove slowly up the cracked asphalt road, past guard towers that stood empty and ominous against the afternoon sky. The main building's entrance was secured with a newer lock, also included in Patricia's key collection. Inside, the prison looked exactly like what Marcus had expected. Long corridors lined with empty cells, common areas where hundreds of inmates had once served their time, administrative offices that still held the ghosts of bureaucratic routine. The air smelled of disuse and industrial cleaning products, though it had been years since anyone had cleaned anything. Sofia stayed close to Marcus as they explored, her earlier excitement tempered by the reality of being inside a place designed to hold people against their will. The cells were small and depressing, each one a concrete box with a narrow window that offered a view of nothing but more concrete and desert. The common areas were larger but somehow more depressing. Spaces where human beings had been warehoused rather than helped. It was in the administrative wing that Marcus found the first sign that his great-uncle's purchase had been about more than real estate investment. Aurelio's office, marked with a nameplate that read, "A. Rivera, Facility Administrator," was different from the others. While most of the building had been stripped of anything valuable when the prison closed, this office remained fully furnished. The desk was solid oak, not the metal institutional furniture found elsewhere in the building. The filing cabinets were high-end models with locks that suggested important documents had once been stored there. Most interesting was the bookshelf, lined with volumes on everything from correctional administration to federal banking regulations, to something called underground construction and security protocols. Marcus was examining the books when Sofia called out from across the office. "Daddy, this wall sounds different." She was standing near what appeared to be a solid concrete wall, tapping it with her small fist. Marcus joined her and knocked on the wall himself. Instead of the solid thunk he expected, the sound was hollow, echoing as if there was empty space behind it. Running his hands along the wall's surface, Marcus found what felt like a seam, barely visible, but definitely present. It took 20 minutes of searching before he discovered the hidden mechanism, a section of bookshelf that, when pulled, revealed itself to be a door. Behind it was a staircase leading down into darkness, lit by emergency lighting that apparently still functioned after all these years. "Should we go down?" Sofia asked, her voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to be careful, to think before acting, to consider the potential dangers. But curiosity won out, and they descended the stairs together, their footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. The basement level was unlike anything Marcus had expected. Instead of the utilitarian concrete and steel of the prison above, this space was finished with high-end materials, polished floors, painted walls, professional lighting. It looked less like a prison basement and more like a high-security office complex. The corridor led to a series of rooms, each more surprising than the last. There was what appeared to be a command center, with banks of monitors and communication equipment that looked trying to figure out how to explain that they'd just inherited something that could either save them or destroy them completely. Outside, the desert sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him of the warning lights he'd seen in evidence lockers, when something was too dangerous to handle without proper protection. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly, "but we're going to figure it out together." As they climbed back up the stairs toward the prison proper, Marcus's mind raced through possibilities and implications. His great-uncle had been involved in something huge, something that the federal government apparently still cared deeply about. The question was whether Aurelio had been a patriot protecting national interests or a criminal who'd stolen $750 million from the American people. Either way, Marcus and Sofia were now at the center of it, and the eviction notice in his pocket seemed like the least of their problems. They had 30 days to figure out how to handle an inheritance that could either save their lives or end them completely. The drive back to Phoenix was quiet, Sofia sleeping in the passenger seat while Marcus tried to process what they'd discovered. Every few minutes, he checked his rearview mirror, half expecting to see federal agents following them, though he wasn't sure if that would be better or worse than being left alone with knowledge he wasn't supposed to have. His phone buzzed with text messages every 20 minutes, all from numbers he didn't recognize, all with the same basic message: "We need to talk." Some claimed to be federal agents, others said they represented private security firms, and one particularly cryptic message simply said, "Your uncle trusted you with this for a reason. Don't let them take it." Back at their apartment, Marcus sat at the kitchen table after Sofia had gone to bed, staring at the documents he'd photographed in the vault. The eviction notice lay beside his phone, both pieces of paper representing different kinds of deadlines, different ways his life could change forever. He thought about Elena, about what she would have advised in this situation. She'd always been the practical one, the one who saw through complications to simple truths. "What's right?" she would have asked. Not what's easy or profitable or safe. What's right? The problem was, Marcus wasn't sure he knew the answer anymore. Was it right to cooperate with federal agents who threatened his daughter's safety? Was it right to keep quiet about a facility that might represent stolen taxpayer money? Was it right to risk everything for the chance to finally provide Sofia with the security she deserved? His laptop chimed with an email from an address he didn't recognize. Uncle, Aurelio. Final, message@securemail.gov. The subject line read, "For Marcus Rivera only. Open immediately." The message was brief and typically cryptic. "Nephew, if you are reading this, then the facility is yours, and the decision is yours. The vault contains proof of everything, both the legitimate storage operation and the evidence of corruption that goes to the highest levels of government. Trust no one who contacted you today. The real threat comes from those who want to bury the truth permanently. Your inheritance includes more than money. It includes responsibility for justice. Do what your conscience tells you is right. The safety deposit box marked, Mr. Final, contains everything you need to know. Uncle Aurelio." Marcus stared at the screen until the words blurred together. His great-uncle had known this moment would come, had planned for it, had chosen Marcus specifically to inherit not just a facility but a decision that could affect the entire country. The next morning brought new complications. Marcus woke to find two black SUVs parked across the street from his apartment complex, their occupants trying too hard to look casual while maintaining obvious surveillance. His phone showed 17 missed calls from various federal agencies, law firms, and organizations he'd never heard of. Sofia noticed the attention immediately. "Daddy, why are those men watching our building?" "I'm not sure yet, sweetheart, but we might need to take a little trip today." They left through the apartment complex's back exit, Marcus carrying a backpack with their essential documents, and Sofia clutching her favorite stuffed animal. The drive back to Copper Ridge took 3 hours instead of 2, Marcus taking a circuitous route to ensure they weren't followed, stopping at gas stations and restaurants to check for surveillance vehicles. The prison looked different in the morning light, less ominous and more like what it actually was, a cover story for something much more important. Marcus parked behind the main building, out of sight from the road, and led Sofia back down to the vault. Safety deposit box MR Final was located in the back corner of the vault, requiring 2 different keys that Marcus found taped under the desk in his uncle's office. Inside was a thick folder containing documents that made the previous day's discoveries seem simple by comparison. The Copper Ridge facility had indeed been established as a secret Federal Reserve storage site, designed to protect emergency currency reserves in case of national crisis. But according to the documents Marcus found, certain high-ranking officials had been using the facility to hide evidence of massive financial crimes. Insider trading, illegal loans to foreign governments, and the systematic theft of federal funds that totaled nearly $2 billion over a 15-year period. Aurelio Rivera hadn't been a criminal. He'd been a whistleblower, documenting years of corruption while appearing to be a loyal government administrator. The evidence he'd gathered implicated senators, cabinet members, and executives from the largest banks in the country. His death 3 months earlier hadn't been from natural causes, as the death certificate claimed, but from poisoning designed to look like a heart attack. The folder also contained detailed instructions from Marcus, written in his uncle's careful handwriting. The facility was now legally his, protected by federal laws that made it nearly impossible for the government to seize private property without lengthy court proceedings. But the real protection came from the dead man switch Aurelio had created. If anything happened to Marcus or Sofia, copies of all evidence would be automatically sent to every major newspaper and television network in the country. "Your job," the final note read, "is not to hide this evidence or profit from it, but to ensure it reaches the right people at the right time. The country deserves to know the truth about how its money has been stolen and by whom. But timing is everything. Move too fast and they'll destroy you before the truth can come out. Wait too long and they'll find another way to bury it forever." Marcus spent the rest of the morning reading through evidence that painted a picture of corruption so vast and systematic that it challenged everything he believed about how the government actually worked. Sofia played in the vault's antechamber, building castles out of empty document boxes while her father tried to understand the full scope of what they'd inherited. The sound of vehicles outside interrupted his reading. Through the prison security cameras, which apparently still functioned, Marcus watched as a convoy of federal agents surrounded the building. Not the FBI vehicles he'd expected, but unmarked vans and SUVs that suggested a more secretive operation. His phone rang with a call from Director Walsh. "Mr. Rivera, we know you're inside the facility. This doesn't have to be complicated. Open the front gate and we'll discuss reasonable terms for transferring custody of the property." "What kind of terms?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Full pardons for any technical violations you may have committed, relocation assistance for you and your daughter, and a substantial financial settlement in exchange for your cooperation in securing the facility." Marcus looked at Sofia, who was watching him with the kind of serious expression that meant she understood more than she was letting on. "And if I refuse? Then we'll be forced to treat this as a national security situation and respond accordingly. You have 1 hour to decide." The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with the most important decision of his life. He could cooperate, take the money, and spend the rest of his days knowing he'd helped cover up crimes that had stolen billions from the American people. Or he could fight, risking everything for the chance to expose the truth. He thought about Elena again, about the values she'd tried to instill in Sofia, about the kind of man he wanted his daughter to remember her father as being. The answer, when it came, was surprisingly clear. Marcus opened his laptop and began typing emails to every journalist, blogger, and news organization he could find online. The subject line was simple: evidence of massive federal corruption. Verify and publish immediately. He attached copies of the most damning documents, along with GPS coordinates for the facility and detailed instructions for accessing the vault. Then he called Director Walsh back. "I've made my decision. You have 1 hour to withdraw your people from my property before I start holding press conferences." "Mr. Rivera, you're making a serious mistake. The people involved in this situation have resources you can't imagine. They will destroy you and your daughter to protect themselves." "Maybe," Marcus said, watching Sofia stack document boxes into an elaborate fort, "but they'll have to do it in front of the entire country now. The evidence is already out there. Taking us out now would just confirm everything." He hung up and waited, holding his daughter close while the desert sun climbed higher and federal agents decided whether to retreat or escalate. Outside, the abandoned prison sat quiet and patient, keeping its secrets while the man who'd inherited them prepared to change everything. The phone calls from journalists started within 20 minutes. Marcus answered each one carefully, confirming the evidence's authenticity while providing enough detail to verify the story's importance. By noon, the first news vans were arriving at the facility's front gate, followed by more federal agents who seemed unsure how to handle a situation that was rapidly becoming very public. Sofia pressed her face against the vault's security monitor, watching the growing crowd outside. "Daddy, are we famous now?" Marcus smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I think we might be, sweetheart. Is that okay with you? Will we still have to move out of our apartment?" Marcus looked around the vault, at the evidence that would reshape how Americans understood their government, at the facility that was now legally theirs, at the future that had suddenly become possible again. "No, baby, I think our housing problems are solved." The story would dominate headlines for months. 3 senators would resign in disgrace, the Secretary of Treasury would be arrested, and the largest banking scandal in American history would result in recovery of nearly $1.8 billion in stolen federal funds. Marcus Rivera, the disgraced cop who'd been laughed at for inheriting an abandoned prison, would become the whistleblower who exposed corruption at the highest levels of government. But that afternoon, sitting in a secret vault with his daughter while reporters gathered outside, Marcus wasn't thinking about headlines or vindication. He was thinking about Elena, about the values she'd wanted Sofia to learn, about the importance of doing what was right even when it was difficult. Sofia looked up from her document fort and smiled. "Daddy, I think Uncle Aurelio was pretty smart." Marcus pulled her close, breathing in her strawberry shampoo scent while federal agents waited outside and the truth prepared to reshape everything. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think he was too." The chaos outside the facility intensified as more media outlets arrived, their satellite trucks forming a semicircle beyond the razor wire fence. Marcus watched through the security monitors as reporters set up cameras and federal agents tried to establish some kind of perimeter, though it was clear nobody had prepared for this level of public attention. Sofia had fallen asleep on a makeshift bed of emergency blankets they'd found in one of the storage rooms, her stuffed elephant clutched tightly to her chest while the adult world exploded around their inherited secret. Marcus's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke 3 hours earlier. CNN wanted an exclusive interview. The Washington Post was demanding verification of the documents. Fox News was already running segments about government corruption and cover-ups. But it was the call from Rebecca Chen, an investigative reporter with the Arizona Republic, that made Marcus pause. "Mr. Rivera, I've been covering federal corruption cases for 12 years, and I've never seen evidence this comprehensive. But you need to understand something about the people you're exposing. They don't just have government connections. They have private resources, mercenary companies, people who make problems disappear permanently." Marcus glanced at Sofia's sleeping form. "Are you trying to scare me? I'm trying to keep you alive long enough to see justice done. These documents you've released, they implicate some of the most powerful people in the country. Senator Hammond alone has connections to defense contractors who've operated in zones where American law doesn't apply. If they decide you're too dangerous to leave alive, federal protection won't be enough." The weight of what they'd stumbled into was beginning to settle on Marcus like a lead blanket. He'd been a street cop, used to dealing with gang members and drug dealers whose violence was direct and personal. This was different. This was the kind of power that could make people vanish without leaving traces, that could manipulate entire news cycles, that could turn heroes into villains with a few well-placed stories and manufactured evidence. "What do you suggest?" he asked, though he suspected there weren't any good options left. "You need allies. Real ones, not just journalists. There are people in government who've been trying to expose this kind of corruption for years. Senator Patricia Morrison from Colorado has been pushing for financial transparency legislation. Congressman David Kim from California chairs the House Oversight Committee. They have the power to provide protection and the motivation to see this through." Marcus was writing down names when the facility's perimeter alarms began sounding. Through the monitors, he could see unmarked vehicles approaching from the desert, moving fast and without regard for the media presence. These weren't federal agents with badges and warrants. These were professionals with equipment that suggested a very different kind of operation. "Rebecca, I have to go." Hostile vehicles approaching the facility. "Marcus, get out of there! Now, take your daughter and run." But there was nowhere to run. The facility was surrounded by 47 acres of empty desert, and Marcus's aging Toyota wouldn't outrun the military-grade vehicles he could see approaching. Instead, he made a decision that went against every survival instinct he possessed. He activated the facility's emergency broadcast system, a relic from its prison days that connected to local emergency services and media outlets. His voice echoed across the desert as he spoke into the microphone, knowing that every word was being recorded and transmitted to dozens of locations simultaneously. "This is Marcus Rivera at the Copper Ridge facility. Unknown armed vehicles are approaching this location with apparent hostile intent. I am here legally with my 8-year-old daughter. Any violence committed against us will be witnessed and recorded by multiple news organizations currently present at this location." The approaching vehicles slowed, then stopped just outside camera range. Marcus could see figures in tactical gear deploying from the vehicles, but they weren't advancing. Apparently, the presence of media had complicated their mission enough to force a reassessment. Sofia stirred awake as the alarms continued to sound. "Daddy, what's happening?" "Some people are upset about the secrets we found, sweetheart, but we're safe here, and there are lots of reporters outside who want to make sure nothing bad happens to us." It was only partially true, but Marcus wasn't about to explain to an 8-year-old that they were potentially in the crosshairs of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Instead, he focused on practical concerns: ensuring the vaults remained secure, maintaining communication with the outside world, and documenting everything that happened for the growing number of investigators who were taking interest in their story. The standoff continued through the afternoon and into the evening. The tactical teams withdrew as darkness fell, but Marcus knew they were still out there, waiting for an opportunity that wouldn't result in public scrutiny. The media presence had become their shield, but it was a fragile protection that could disappear if attention shifted elsewhere. Senator Morrison's office called at 9:30 that evening, her chief of staff explaining that the senator was personally flying to Phoenix to meet with Marcus and review the evidence firsthand. Congressman Kim's office followed an hour later with a similar message. By midnight, Marcus had received calls from representatives of 3 different congressional committees, 2 inspector general offices, and the Government Accountability Office. The scope of the corruption was becoming clearer as more experts analyzed the documents. The scheme had been operating for over 15 years, involving not just the theft of federal funds but the manipulation of currency markets, illegal loans to foreign governments, and the systematic weakening of American financial security. The total damage was estimated at over $5 billion, money that had been stolen from taxpayers and used to enrich a network of politicians, bankers, and defense contractors. Marcus's great-uncle had been documenting this conspiracy for years, collecting evidence while pretending to be a loyal administrator. His death had triggered the transfer of the facility to Marcus, along with instructions that suggested Aurelio had known exactly what would happen when the truth came out. The dead man switch he'd created wasn't just about protecting Marcus and Sofia. It was about ensuring the evidence reached the right people at the right time. The first congressional delegation arrived at dawn, their convoy escorted by Arizona State Police and followed by additional media vehicles. Senator Morrison was a small woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of presence that filled whatever room she entered. Congressman Kim was younger, a former prosecutor who'd built his career on exposing government waste and corruption. Together, they represented the kind of political power that could provide real protection. "Mr. Rivera," Senator Morrison said as they descended into the vault. "What you've uncovered here represents the largest government corruption scandal since Watergate, but you need to understand that exposing it will require sustained effort over months or years. These people have been covering their tracks for decades. They won't give up easily." Marcus led them through the evidence, explaining what his uncle had documented and how the facility had been used to hide both stolen money and incriminating documents. The vault contained not just financial records, but recordings of conversations, photographs of meetings, and detailed timelines showing how the conspiracy had evolved over time. Congressman Kim studied a set of documents detailing illegal loans to foreign governments. This shows systematic violation of federal banking laws, but more than that, it shows these people were essentially conducting their own foreign policy using stolen taxpayer money. They were undermining American interests for personal profit. The political implications were staggering. 3 sitting senators were directly implicated, along with the current Secretary of Treasury and former officials from both Democratic and Republican administrations. The conspiracy had operated regardless of which party controlled government, suggesting a level of institutional corruption that threatened the foundations of American democracy. Sofia spent the morning playing in the administrative offices upstairs while the adults conducted their grim business in the vault below. She'd adapted to their strange situation with the resilience of childhood, treating the abandoned prison like an adventure rather than a crisis. But Marcus could see the stress beginning to affect her, the way she stayed closer to him than usual, the questions about when they could go home, the careful way she avoided talking about the armed people who'd surrounded them the day before. The breakthrough came when Senator Morrison's cybersecurity expert discovered that the facility's computer systems were still connected to federal networks. Rivera had maintained access to government databases right up until his death, downloading financial records and communication logs that provided real-time evidence of ongoing criminal activity. "This is incredible," the expert said, scrolling through files that showed money transfers from just weeks earlier. "The conspiracy is still active. They're still stealing money, still manipulating markets. And now that you've exposed them, they're probably accelerating their operations to move assets offshore before they can be frozen." The realization transformed the situation from a historical corruption case to an active national security crisis. Working with federal investigators who were finally on the right side of the law, Marcus helped provide access to systems that revealed the current scope of the conspiracy. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies in Delaware, real estate holdings purchased with stolen federal funds. The network was vast and still growing. But the most disturbing discovery came when they accessed Rivera's personal files. His death hadn't been natural. Autopsy records that had been classified showed clear evidence of poisoning, specifically a compound that mimicked heart attack symptoms but left trace evidence in tissue samples. The medical examiner who'd performed the autopsy had been pressured to rule the death natural, but he'd preserved samples and documented his concerns in sealed files. "They killed him," Marcus said, the words hitting him like a physical blow. "My uncle discovered their operation, collected evidence, and they murdered him to keep him quiet." Senator Morrison's expression was grim, which means they'll have no hesitation about killing you and Sofia if they think it will protect their interests. "We need to get you into protective custody immediately." But Marcus shook his head. Running won't solve anything. They'll just wait until the media attention dies down and then finish what they started. "The only way we're safe is if the truth comes out completely, with enough evidence that killing us would be pointless." The decision to stay at the facility and continue cooperating with investigators was both brave and terrifying. Marcus knew they were essentially painting targets on their backs, but he also understood that hiding would only delay the inevitable. The conspiracy had operated in shadows for decades. The only way to defeat it was to drag everything into the light and keep it there until justice was done. Over the following days, the facility became the center of the largest government corruption investigation in American history. Teams of federal investigators worked around the clock to analyze evidence, trace financial transactions, and build cases against the dozens of people implicated in the conspiracy. The media presence grew rather than diminished, with major networks establishing permanent positions outside the facility's gates. Marcus found himself becoming an accidental expert on government corruption, working closely with investigators to explain what his uncle had documented and how the various pieces of evidence connected together. It was exhausting work, but also satisfying in a way he hadn't experienced since his police days. He was once again fighting for justice, but this time the stakes were national rather than local. Sofia adapted to their new reality with remarkable resilience. The facility's administrative wing became their temporary home, with investigators and security personnel ensuring they had everything they needed. She attended school virtually through a tablet computer, her teacher and classmates fascinated by her unique living situation. The other children thought it was incredibly cool that she was living in a secret government facility, though Sofia was careful not to share too many details about what the adults were doing there. The political response to the revelations was swift and dramatic. Senator Hammond, one of the primary figures implicated in the conspiracy, was arrested at his Washington office while attempting to board a private jet to Switzerland. The Secretary of Treasury resigned and immediately hired the most expensive criminal defense attorney in the country. Stock markets fluctuated wildly as investors tried to assess the potential impact of the corruption on federal financial stability. But the most significant development came when investigators discovered that the conspiracy had international connections. The stolen American funds had been used to purchase influence in foreign governments, fund illegal arms sales, and destabilize currency markets in developing countries. What had started as a domestic corruption case was evolving into an international incident with implications for American foreign policy and national security. Mr. Rivera, Senator Morrison said during one of their evening briefings, "You need to understand that exposing this conspiracy has implications far beyond recovering stolen money. Some of our closest allies have been affected by these operations. There will be diplomatic consequences, intelligence relationships that need to be rebuilt, trust that will take years to restore." Marcus looked out through the facility's reinforced windows at the media encampment that had grown into a small city of tents, trailers, and satellite trucks. "Are you saying we should have kept quiet? Let them continue stealing and undermining the country? No, absolutely not. But I want you to understand the scope of what you've started. This isn't going to end with a few arrests and some recovered money. This is going to reshape how America conducts business both domestically and internationally." The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but Marcus found strength in remembering why they'd made this choice. Sofia deserved to grow up in a country where corruption was exposed rather than protected, where doing the right thing was rewarded rather than punished. If exposing the truth meant disrupting comfortable relationships and forcing difficult conversations, then that was a price worth paying. The first arrests began 3 weeks after the story broke. Federal agents conducted coordinated raids in 12 cities, targeting bank executives, government officials, and defense contractors who'd participated in the conspiracy. The evidence from Hector Rivera's files provided prosecutors with everything they needed to secure indictments, but it was clear that building the actual cases would take months or years. Marcus received regular updates on the investigation's progress, but he was most interested in the efforts to recover stolen funds. Every dollar they could trace and return to the federal treasury was money that could be used for schools, infrastructure, or social programs instead of enriching corrupt officials. The facility had become a symbol of government accountability, proof that even the most sophisticated corruption schemes could be exposed if the right person was willing to take the risk. The threats continued, though they became more subtle as media attention made direct action impossible. Anonymous messages warned that Marcus was making enemies who would never forget or forgive. His car tires were slashed twice in the facility's parking area, despite the presence of security personnel. Someone attempted to hack into Sofia's virtual school sessions, though they were stopped by cybersecurity experts who'd been assigned to protect the family. Rebecca Chen, the journalist who'd first warned Marcus about the dangers he faced, became a regular visitor to the facility. Her newspaper was running a series of investigative articles based on the evidence Marcus had provided, and she'd become something of an expert on the conspiracy's operations. "The most frustrating thing," she told Marcus during one of their conversations, "is how long this has been going on. People in government knew something was wrong. Investigators found irregularities. Whistleblowers tried to speak up. But the system protected itself. Until your uncle collected enough evidence to make denial impossible." Marcus had been thinking about that a lot. How many people had known pieces of the truth but lacked the complete picture that would have exposed everything? Hector Rivera had spent years patiently gathering evidence, knowing that partial revelations would be dismissed or covered up. Only by documenting the entire scope of the conspiracy had he created a case that couldn't be ignored or buried. The facility itself was becoming a symbol of government accountability, attracting visitors from around the world who wanted to understand how such massive corruption had been hidden and exposed. Tours were obviously impossible given the ongoing investigation, but Marcus regularly spoke with delegations of foreign officials, academic researchers, and government reform advocates who were studying the case. "What strikes me most," said Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a Harvard professor studying government corruption, "is how your uncle understood that timing was everything. He could have exposed pieces of this conspiracy years ago, but it would have been dismissed as the complaints of a disgruntled employee. By waiting until he had complete documentation and creating a dead man's switch that ensured the evidence would be released regardless of what happened to him, he guaranteed that the truth would come out." Marcus was beginning to understand that his inheritance included more than just property and evidence. Aurelio Rivera had passed on a responsibility that extended far beyond the immediate corruption case. The facility had become a proof of concept for government accountability, demonstrating that even the most powerful conspiracies could be exposed if approached with patience, intelligence, and courage. Sofia's 8th birthday fell during their 2nd month at the facility, and Marcus was determined to make it special despite their unusual circumstances. The investigation team surprised her with a party in the facility's main conference room, complete with a cake that had been decorated to look like a castle. The birthday girl's wish, when she blew out her candles, was for all the bad people to go to jail so we can go home. It was a simple wish that captured the complexity of their situation. They couldn't go home until the investigation was complete and the threats against them had been neutralized. But home itself had changed. The cramped apartment in Phoenix, the eviction notices, the constant worry about money. Those problems belonged to a different life. Whatever happened next, they would face it with resources and allies they'd never had before. The facility had changed as well. What had started as an abandoned prison and secret vault had evolved into something entirely new. A symbol of resistance against corruption, a center for government accountability research, and proof that ordinary citizens could challenge even the most powerful conspiracies when armed with truth and courage. As Sofia played with investigators, children who'd come to the birthday party, Marcus reflected on how much their lives had changed since that morning when he'd received the eviction notice. They'd gone from facing homelessness to living at the center of the biggest government corruption scandal in decades. More importantly, they'd discovered that doing the right thing, even when it was dangerous, could lead to outcomes they'd never imagined possible. The investigation was far from over. Trials would take years. International implications would need to be addressed. The systems that had allowed such massive corruption to flourish would need to be reformed. But the foundation had been laid for justice, and Marcus knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with the strength that came from standing on the right side of history. Outside, the desert sun was setting behind the media encampment that had become their temporary neighborhood. Federal investigators were preparing for another long night of document analysis and evidence compilation. Security teams were conducting their evening perimeter checks. And in a converted conference room in an abandoned prison that had become the most important building in America, a single father and his daughter were building a new life based on the simple principle that truth, no matter how dangerous, was always worth fighting for. The phone calls from investigators, journalists, and government officials would continue through the evening. Tomorrow would bring new developments in the case, new evidence to analyze, new challenges to face. But for now, Marcus was content to help his daughter clean up birthday party decorations. While around them, the work of justice continued its steady, relentless progress toward accountability and truth. The breakthrough came on a cold December morning when federal prosecutors announced the largest coordinated arrest operation in American history. 37 individuals across 14 states were taken into custody simultaneously, including 2 sitting senators, the former Secretary of Treasury, and the CEOs of 3 major banking institutions. The evidence from Aurelio Rivera's vault had provided prosecutors with everything they needed to dismantle the entire corruption network. Marcus watched the arrests unfold on television from the facility's administrative office, Sofia beside him working on a math worksheet that her virtual teacher had assigned. The images were surreal. Powerful people he'd seen on news programs for years being led away in handcuffs, their carefully constructed public personas crumbling under the weight of documented criminal activity. "Daddy, are those the bad people?" Sofia asked, looking up from her multiplication problems. "Yes, sweetheart. Those are the people who were stealing money that belonged to everyone. Will they have to give it back?" Marcus smiled, remembering when his biggest worry had been making rent on their Phoenix apartment. Every penny they can find. The asset recovery operation was already underway. Bank accounts containing hundreds of millions in stolen funds had been frozen across multiple countries. Real estate purchased with federal money was being seized. Shell companies that had hidden the conspiracy's financial operations were being dissolved, their assets returned to the United States Treasury. But the most satisfying moment came when Thomas Marshall, the supervisor who destroyed Marcus's career at Boeing, was arrested at his home in Scottsdale. The same man who'd buried Marcus's safety report and then framed him for embezzlement was led away in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment. Justice, Marcus reflected, sometimes took longer than expected, but it was worth the wait. The financial impact was staggering. Federal investigators estimated that over $4 billion in stolen funds would be recovered, money that had been systematically looted from taxpayers over 15 years. The recovered assets would be used to strengthen federal financial security systems and fund programs that had been cut due to artificial budget shortfalls created by the conspiracy's theft. Director Walsh, the FBI official who'd initially threatened Marcus, called to personally apologize and offer a full explanation of what had really happened. The threats and intimidation tactics hadn't come from legitimate federal agencies, but from a rogue operation funded by the conspiracy to protect their interests. Real federal investigators had been working to expose the corruption for years, but they lacked the comprehensive evidence that Rivera had collected. "Your uncle was a hero," Walsh explained during a visit to the facility. He spent the last decade of his life documenting crimes that threatened the foundation of American democracy. And you've ensured that his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Marcus had mixed feelings about being called a hero. All he'd done was make the moral choice to expose wrongdoing rather than hide it. But he understood that in a system where corruption had been normalized, simply doing the right thing had become an act of courage. The international response to the revelations was equally dramatic. Several foreign governments demanded explanations for how American officials had used stolen funds to interfere in their domestic politics. Trade relationships that had been undermined by the conspiracy's market manipulation began to stabilize as legitimate government officials worked to repair the damage. Sofia's education had become something of a case study in adaptive learning. Her virtual classroom had expanded to include students from around the world whose parents were involved in government accountability work. She was learning about civics, economics, and international relations in ways that no traditional curriculum could have provided. Her teacher joked that Sofia probably understood government corruption better than most college students. The facility itself was undergoing transformation. The Department of Justice was converting it into a permanent center for government accountability research, a place where whistleblowers could safely provide evidence of corruption and where investigators could analyze complex financial crimes. Marcus had been offered the position of director, recognizing his unique understanding of both law enforcement and the facility's systems. "It's fitting," Senator Morrison told him during the announcement ceremony. "Your uncle created this place to expose corruption. You've ensured it will continue serving that purpose for generations to come." The salary that came with the director position was more than Marcus had ever imagined earning. Sofia would attend the best schools, have college funds that could send her anywhere she wanted to study, and grow up with the security that Marcus had always wanted to provide. But more than financial security, they had purpose. The work they were doing mattered in ways that extended far beyond their personal circumstances. Rebecca Chen's investigative series had won a Pulitzer Prize for uncovering the full scope of the conspiracy. During the awards ceremony, she credited Marcus with having the courage to expose evidence that lesser people would have buried or sold to the highest bidder. In an age of cynicism about government and democracy, quote, she said in her acceptance speech, "Marcus Rivera reminded us that ordinary citizens can still challenge the most powerful forces when they choose truth over safety." The trials began the following spring, with Marcus serving as a key witness in multiple cases. His testimony was crucial in explaining how the evidence had been collected and what it revealed about the conspiracy's operations. But the most powerful moments came when prosecutors played recordings that Rivera had made of conversations between conspirators, conversations that revealed the casual way they discussed stealing from taxpayers and undermining American interests. Senator Hammond's trial was particularly dramatic. The man who'd once controlled billions in defense spending was reduced to pleading for leniency, claiming he'd been manipulated by more sophisticated criminals. But the evidence showed him actively participating in meetings where theft and market manipulation were planned in detail. He was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison, though he would be eligible for parole in 12 years if he cooperated fully with ongoing investigations. The broader impact on American politics was transformative. Campaign finance laws were strengthened to prevent the kind of influence buying that had enabled the conspiracy. Financial oversight of government operations was expanded and placed under independent inspection. Whistleblower protections were enhanced to ensure that future Aurelio Riveras could expose corruption without fearing for their lives. Sofia's 9th birthday was celebrated with a party at the facility that included investigators, families, journalists who'd covered the story, and government officials who'd helped expose the truth. The guest list read like a directory of people working to make government more accountable and transparent. Sofia's wish that year was for all the other bad people to be caught too, recognizing that corruption was an ongoing challenge rather than a problem that could be solved once and forever. Marcus had been approached by publishers wanting him to write a book about their experience, by movie producers interested in adapting their story, and by universities offering teaching positions in criminal justice and government accountability. But he was content with his work at the facility, knowing that the research and investigation happening there would prevent future conspiracies from taking root. The most unexpected development came when foreign governments began requesting assistance in investigating their own corruption cases. The methodologies that Aurelio Rivera had developed for documenting financial crimes were being adapted for use around the world. The facility was becoming an international center for anti-corruption work, proof that the principles of transparency and accountability transcended national boundaries. As winter approached, Marcus and Sofia moved into a house in nearby Tucson, close enough to the facility for Marcus's work, but far enough to give Sofia a normal childhood experience. The house was modest by the standards of what they could now afford, but it felt like a mansion compared to their cramped Phoenix apartment. Sofia had her own room, painted in colors she'd chosen herself, filled with books and art supplies and space to grow. The evening ritual of checking on Sofia before bed reminded Marcus of simpler times, but also of how much their lives had changed. Instead of worrying about eviction notices and unpaid bills, he was helping coordinate international investigations and developing systems to prevent government corruption. Instead of driving Uber to pay rent, he was testifying before Congress about the need for stronger financial oversight. But the most important change was Sofia herself. She'd grown from a worried child who understood too much about adult problems into a confident young person who believed that good people could make a difference in the world. She talked about wanting to be a lawyer or journalist when she grew up, careers focused on uncovering truth and fighting injustice. "Daddy," she said one evening as he tucked her into bed, "do you think Uncle Aurelio knew we would be okay?" Marcus considered the question carefully. His great-uncle had planned every detail of his evidence collection and transfer, had anticipated the threats they would face, and created protections to keep them safe. More than that, he'd chosen Marcus specifically to inherit not just property, but responsibility. "I think he knew that doing the right thing is never easy, but it's always worth it," Marcus replied. "And I think he trusted us to be brave enough to see it through." The corruption trials would continue for another 2 years, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The evidence was too comprehensive, the documentation too detailed, the public attention too focused for the justice system to fail. Marcus had learned that exposing truth required not just courage but patience, persistence, and faith that right would eventually prevail. The facility hummed with activity as investigators from around the world worked to understand and prevent the kind of systematic corruption that had nearly undermined American democracy. The abandoned prison had become a beacon of accountability, proof that even the most powerful conspiracies could be exposed when good people refused to remain silent. As Marcus walked through the facility each morning, past offices where analysts traced financial crimes and conference rooms where international delegations learned about transparency protocols, he remembered the rainy day in Phoenix when he'd helped a woman with a twisted ankle. Every choice they'd made since then had led to this moment, this place, this purpose. Sofia was thriving in her new school, making friends and excelling in classes, while maintaining her interest in justice and government accountability. She volunteered at the facility on weekends, helping organize documents and learning about the important work being done there. Her teachers said she had unusual maturity and understanding of civic responsibility for someone her age. The final trial concluded on a warm spring day with the conviction of the last major conspirator. Marcus stood outside the courthouse with Sofia, watching as news reporters summarized the end of the largest government corruption case in American history. Over $5 billion had been recovered, dozens of criminals had been sentenced to prison, and systems had been reformed to prevent similar conspiracies in the future. "Is it over now?" Sofia asked as they walked back to their car. Marcus looked at the facility in the distance, at the work that would continue for decades to come, at the responsibility they'd accepted to ensure that truth and accountability remained stronger than corruption and greed. "This part is over," he said, putting his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "But the work continues. There will always be people who try to steal from others or abuse their power. Our job is to make sure they can't hide in the shadows anymore." They drove home through the desert sunset, past the place where their lives had changed forever, toward a future built on the simple principle that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they chose courage over comfort, truth over safety, and justice over personal gain. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.